I know I said it at the last service, but I have to say it again. He's going back there. But I love that Jeff sings about his long hair. He has no hair. He has no hair, so. But that's what's going on. All right, so today, this message is the direct result of a trip that I just took. And I preface it all with that, first of all, to say, we at the Garden here are well aware of what's going on in Houston, and unfortunately, we're not in a position where we can respond immediately because of the way that we plan our services. But no, we are aware of what's happening there, and we as a community will be addressing that situation in the weeks to come, and we have sent out emails this week about how you can respond to what's happening in Houston. But today's message has been greatly impacted by a trip I took to Normandy with Dr. E. Carver McGriff, who is a retired pastor from St. Luke's, who actually just happens to be with us here today. Carver is a World War II veteran who served there and took us around to the different sites in Normandy that have forever changed my life. And I found out that he's doing it again. For the last 7 years, it's been the last trip that Carver is taking to Normandy. And I say that here today because if you too have an opportunity and the privilege to travel, I encourage you to get on this trip right away because rumor has it it's already about half filled or whatever, but it is a profound life-changing trip. But when the events of Charlottesville, Virginia unfolded a few weeks ago, I think you recall we had a special day that day. We had our special calendar guys and girls that we were honoring on that day. But I have to note that that evening, the bishop sent out a special notice that said it was important for the church to address the issues of Charlottesville and to not stay silent. In fact, on the 12th, he wrote these words. He said, as communities continue to struggle with senseless acts of violence, as well as the recent rise in snakes that many thought to be dead and gone, or at least they lie dormant in their appearance for years, it is the church who can help unite and break down barriers and free those who are chained by society or by their own views, born in a falsity that any human being is less than another. He reminded us all in that email, which I am reminding you today, that we are, as Christians, are called today to be mindful of our vows as Christians. The vows that we take as Christians, and that is to recommit ourselves to being true Christians and people of faith who can be living examples of peace throughout the world, and to remember that indeed, peace and love is for the whole world. Now, I know it was a few weeks ago, but let me remind you exactly what happened in Charlottesville. What happened was that on August 12th, the Unite the Right rally was put together in protest for the removing of the statue of a Confederate General, Robert E. Lee, in the center of the city. It was been described as the largest white supremacist event in recent U.S. history. It was organized by Jason Kessler, who was a former journalist and a member of the Proud Boys, an ultra-nationalist group. It did not take long for things in Charlottesville to get out of hand. In fact, by 11:30 a.m., protesters and counter-protesters had gotten into such a mess that a state of emergency had been declared in Virginia. After the people dispersed the massive crowd, a 20-year-old young man, James Alex Field Jr., allegedly slammed his car into a group of people, counter-protesters, and took the life of a 32-year-old paralegal, Heather Heyer. 19 others were injured, and then also in that event, 2 Virginia State police officers, Lieutenant Jay Cullen and Pilot Trooper Burke Bates, also lost their lives from above in a helicopter crash. The Department of Justice has opened a federal probe into the events at Charlottesville. After the events of that weekend, our president and others started talking about the many sides of the protest and who was responsible. Now, this event is not the only thing that reminds us that we are a divided nation today. All you have to do is look at the government. It seems to me that we are at a standstill right now that we cannot make any decisions, that we are Democrats and Republicans and progressives and liberals and conservatives, and all taking sides on issues that are impacting people's lives in a very real way. Not only their lives, but their health and their very well-being. Spending time in Europe the last few weeks has made it clear to me that the eyes of the world are on the United States. And I have to tell you, after being there a week, when people the second week would ask me where I was from, I would boldly say Canada. But the truth is, in our very nature, we are people who tend to take sides. I mean, this whole weekend, how many people didn't attend a high school football game on Friday night and root for your side? Or how many of my Fever friends root last night for the women of the Fever? I mean, we play games where there are winners and losers. We live in a world where we are encouraged to take sides. But our scripture text today is from 1 Kings, verse 3, verses 16 through 28. King Solomon addresses the issue of taking sides in his beautiful, brilliant way. See, there are these two mothers who have both had children, and then they're in a very tough situation because one of those children had died. And we have to figure out who the living child still belongs to. In this scene from Solomon, oh, that would be a very different movie. In this scene from Solomon and Sheba, but I bet you we'd show it here at the garden. In this scene from Solomon and Sheba, Yul Brynner, playing Solomon, partakes some amazing wisdom for all of us while Gina Lollobrigida sits by and witnesses the master at work. So instead of me reading the text today, Yul Brynner, our King Solomon, is going to lead us through this well-known story from the Old Testament in the story of the two mothers. See, in the end, it wasn't about which woman was right and which woman was wrong or whose side Solomon is on. No, the wise always side with truth. And the truth of the matter is, it's all about the baby. Of course, the true mother of the baby loves the baby so much that she is willing to give the baby up to another mother. And we too share in a story of a God who is willing to give a baby up so that we could experience the love of God. And as with God and as with the mother, so this king is all about the baby. God is on the side of the baby, ensuring the health and the well-being of the baby. See, the lesson is one that God calls us to hear again today. God is on the side of children. It's all about the baby. And we are all God's babies. We are all children of God, created by God and called to love God. I find it most serendipitous that we were not able to address the events of Charlottesville on August 13th, because on that day we had invited these amazing calendar guys and gals in their 80s, 90s, and 100s as special guests at the garden to celebrate their accomplishments in Indianapolis. If you remember, most of the people who had gathered here that day were African American. Something tells me that they have stories about discrimination and at a time when they were not all on the same side as all of us in the room today. People that had gathered here on that day, those African American people, may very well have been impacted by the monument of the Robert E. Lee statue very differently than I or those young, misguided men who had gathered to protest. I consider what those folks accomplished, the Tuskegee Airmen and the African American woman who owned a business long before that kind of thing was done. Something tells me if we had asked them a question in their time about a statue, that they probably wouldn't really think much about it. Why? Because I think for them, their whole lives were all about the babies. Loving and caring for babies, even though they had been discriminated against, even though they had had a terrible situation that most of us will never know. They lived their life in such a way to love all God's children, and their lives today, 80, 90, and 100-year-olds, are living examples of that love. I find it serendipitous that in a nation where I am asked to take sides on issues of refugees and who is in and who is out, I have had the privilege to travel. I have had the privilege to travel. Yes, to Gay Paris, to go and visit the Eiffel Tower for photo opportunities and ice cream. But I have to tell you, in my privilege to travel, I encountered people who were not traveling out of privilege, but traveling because they had no place else to be. Outside the Eiffel Tower, you will find Syrian family refugees sitting by the area there as tourists pass, taking pictures and eating ice cream, who have not traveled there because they choose to. Right by my side were the faces of infants that I am telling you were not even weeks old. Infants who have no place to live. In this place, Paris, where the only wall was that I could not understand the language, I am reminded that it's not about whose side I am on. It's all about the baby. I honestly have to admit that I wish in some way there was a physical wall, because I, to this day, cannot get that little baby's face out of my head. Friends, I'm not saying I have the answers on immigration or on refugees, but I do know as a Christian who wishes to live out my call in the Christian faith, it has to always be about the baby. It seems serendipitous to me that since August 12th in Charlottesville, I have had the honor, again, of traveling for my choice to a place called Normandy, France, to look back almost 75 years since the D-Day landings, to visit the places where young men went to ensure the freedom of this Western world so young men could protest things like statues, to visit the museums, to get a glimpse into the stories in the battlefields where these young men fought, has certainly opened my eyes in a new way. That now more than ever, I see that there is no place in our nation for groups that seek to remind the world of our racial differences and to promote racial discrimination, racial dominance. As one person on our trip shared, my husband, having visited in the memorials and museums, watched the footage, and heard firsthand accounts from Carver of the atrocities of war, it is almost inconceivable to comprehend. There are people in America today who would advocate a return to the standards and ideals of Nazism or of a supremacist agenda. We can never again allow the horrors of the past become possibilities of the future. The cost to humanity alone is far too great a price to pay, and the result will set nations back decades in their development. And so the challenge is, my friends, it's all about the baby. Not just one baby, not just one race, not just one place, but all babies. And we must remember, we are all children of God. As difficult as it is, it's about all the babies of the world, and that's difficult. It's about these babies, these misguided young men. They are children of God. It is about these babies. This is a photo of the young men who were there on D-Day. These young men, many of these who lost their lives for the freedom of the misguided young men today, it's about these babies. Perhaps today the true answer in all of this is that we find a way somehow to take all those young men from Charlottesville, the Unite to Right people, to the shores of Normandy, along with some of the men who were there, who fought for their freedoms. Perhaps then their perspective would change somewhat. Maybe we can take them to this place. This is the American Cemetery at Normandy, where some 10,000 names of soldiers who died are written and their bodies and remains lie. Men like Hubert Rawlings from Indiana, James Anderson, Alden Olson, Charles Cheek, James Coe. We were encouraged as we visited that place not only just to read the names, but to pause and pray for each one of those 10,000 young men, 4 women, and 33 sets of brothers. We were asked to be mindful of the lives they left behind, their mothers, their families, their hopes, their dreams, what they died for. including the rights of misguided young men in Charlottesville. Carver asked us to pray and to give God thanks because ultimately they cared about the babies. Now, I think we would also not only encourage those young men to go to that cemetery, but I think we would encourage them to go to this cemetery as well. I would like to see the young men of Charlottesville, the Unite to Right rally guys, here at La Combe, the German cemetery in Normandy, which has the remains of 21,000 German soldiers. Soldiers like Martin Marquardt, Wilhelm Ruzicka, Walter Kraus. These men, too, Carver reminded us we needed to pray for. We needed to remember their mothers who grieved, the hope for their lives that they had lost, the girlfriends they had left behind, the dreams that they believed that they were fighting for. Yes, we needed to pray for them as well, because for them, too, it was all about the baby. In the end, friends, I have to admit, I am on a side. I want to be on the side of the baby. I want to be on the side of this baby, and that baby, and your baby, and the Syrian baby, and yes, the Aryan baby. I want to be on the side of the baby. But I must remember it's not only these adorable babies, but it's this baby too, a German officer. And yes, it's this baby, Private First Class Everett Carver McGriff. It's all about this baby. This is Jillian Pruitt. Actually, Sergeant First Class Jillian Pruitt, who just happens to be the garden's business administrator, who received word that she's being called up to help in Houston and is on call right now. We don't know when she'll need to go. It's about this baby who has been put in a position where she too is willing to give up time with her own children to make life better for other babies. Yes, it's about this baby. But do you know what? It's also about this baby too. Friends, when Jesus gathered at the Last Supper on that night with all of his friends, he didn't stand at the door and say, "You are in and you're out." He let all those babies in, all of them. Ones that would betray him, ones that would deny him, ones that would run from him. Today, he invites into the circle Jason Kessler, this misguided young man. He lives now with Heather Heyer. He is there with James Alex Field. He is there with Jillian. And he is there with Carver. And he is there with you, and he is there with me. He doesn't give us the right to decide who is in and who is out. This is difficult. Because in this circle we have Kim Jong-un, and we have President Donald Trump, and we have all of the people that we struggle with. And do you know what Jesus tells us to do with the people we struggle with? He tells us to get on our hands and feet and to wash their feet and to love them and to hug them, because it's all about the baby. Amen.